We have breaking news. Former New York Congressman George Santos has pleaded guilty to 2 federal felony charges in a Long Island courtroom today. The former New York lawmaker appeared in court this afternoon. This is video of him walking in today. He was facing a total of 23 felony counts. He ended up pleading guilty to wire fraud and aggravated identity theft, but he had faced money laundering, theft of public funds, making false statements to the FEC charges as well. Now, the judge hearing the case says Santos faces somewhere between 6 and 8 years in prison. A formal sentencing will be held later.
So Republican Congressman, the expelled Republican Congressman George Santos has pleaded guilty to all of his crimes. Let's talk about it. This is George Anthony DeVolder Santos. Now, George Santos came to fame because he beat a Democrat in a heavily Democratic district in New York. It shocked the political world.
On Long Island, New York's 3rd congressional district, another flip to red. GOP candidate George Santos won against Democrat Robert Zimmerman in a district that spans the North Shore of Nassau County and also parts of Queens. And that right there is the seat that was previously held by Tom Suozzi, a Democrat.
And I want to thank my team, all of you. This campaign was never about me. It was always about the people.
Now, one thing interesting about the George Santos story is that he was the first openly gay Republican to ever be elected to Congress. Now, let's keep it real. All politicians lie. If you believe your guy doesn't lie, they fooled you to a grand scale. But George Santos took this to another level. For instance, George Santos was telling people he was Jewish, but when people just looked under the curtain, they found out that he wasn't Jewish.
It's not about the Democratic Party, though. This is about your relationship, frankly, with the people who've entrusted you to go and fight for them. And I think one of the questions that really probably hits home to a lot of people is are you Jewish? We've got a letter that your campaign sent out earlier this year, which reads as follows. As a proud American Jew, I've been to Israel numerous times for educational, business, and leisurely trips. You said there in that letter that you are, quote, a proud American Jew. How do you explain that?
My heritage is Jewish. I've always identified as Jewish. I was raised a practicing Catholic. I think I've gone through this. Even I've not being raised a practicing Jew. I've always joked with friends and circles, even in the campaign, I'd say, guys, I'm Jewish. Remember, I was raised Catholic. So, look, I understand everybody wants to nitpick at me. I'm going to reassure this once and for all. I'm not a facade. I'm not a persona.
So he's not Jewish. He is Jewish. Yeah, square that, sir. It even got so bad that people weren't sure if his name was actually George Santos.
Did I embellish my resume? Yes, I did. And I'm sorry.
George Santos. George, who we know is a friend, and he's known as Anthony DeVolder to me. So I don't know where George Santos came into the thing, but that's what it says here.
I've always known him as Anthony DeVolder. I've never known him as George Santos.
Then on top of that, none of his work history matched. The schools he said he went to, he didn't go to. The jobs he said he worked, he never worked. Literally, George Santos seemed to be all made up.
We don't do enough. They label us as the lazy generation.
The allegations were exposed in a New York Times article, Santos admitting to some of them. He claimed to have graduated from Baruch in 2010, but now says he never graduated from any college. He also claimed to have worked for Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, but has now confessed to only working for a company that did business with both of them and downplayed the lie.
When you tell blatant lies, not embellishments. And this is, I think, one of the biggest concerns, Congressman-elect, is that you don't really seem to be taking this seriously. You've apologized. You said you've made mistakes, but you've outright lied. A lie is not an embellishment on a resume. You said you worked at Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, but they've said, we've got no record of this guy working for us. You've said you've gone to and graduated from these universities, but they've said, well, we've got no record of that. These are blatant lies, and it calls into question how your constituents and the American people can believe anything that you may say when you are standing on the floor of the House of Representatives supposedly fighting for them. That's the real issue here.
Well, look, I agree with what you're saying, and as I stated, and I continue, we can debate my resume and how I worked with firms.
So those are some of the lies of George Santos. Like, he even lied about surviving an assassination attempt to show you how sick this guy was with the embellishments, as he calls. So now here's a quick word from this video sponsor, Ground News. Now, when I was doing research for this project, I always start with Ground News. And the reason why I start with Ground News is because it aggregates everything so I can see it in one place. Here it is. Former New York Representative George Santos pleads guilty to wire fraud. It also gives you a nice little synopsis of the story and what happens, and then gives you all the sources based on political affiliation, left, right, and center. Now, the power of Ground News is really understanding the framing of the narrative of the story based on a right-wing perspective or a left-wing perspective. Check out this example. Now, this is a story about how a Florida judge blocked a law from going into effect that prevented doctors from prescribing puberty blockers to children. Now, here's the narrative on the left. U.S. federal judge rules Florida ban on gender-affirming care unconstitutional. Huge win in Florida as judge strikes down gender-affirming care ban. Now, compare that to what they're saying on the right. Federal judge strikes down Florida law protecting minors from harmful puberty blockers, or judge strikes down Florida law protecting minors from transgender medical intervention. Which side do you believe is describing what happened the best? Now, if you want to see how the news is being spent on the right, left, and center, check them out. Go to ground.news/Nate. That's ground.news/Nate, and you'll save 40% off the Vantage plan. And it allows you to see everything. Don't just be fooled by only looking at one side, but get the full picture on Ground News. Remember, check them out at ground.news/Nate to get 40% off. Now, if this video was just about George Santos's lies, it would be about an hour long. So these are just touching on some of the untruths that George Santos has claimed. Now, after all of this, the FBI started looking into George Santos's past because they're like, who the hell did these people elect? They thought they were electing George Santos, but he's going by Anthony DeVolder. They thought that he graduated these schools, but he never attended them. Who the hell is this guy? And when the FBI started peeling back the layers, they found some really disturbing stuff. So the first thing the feds found was that in February 2020, during COVID, George Santos was an investment banker. He was making about $120,000 a year. But they also found that after COVID hit, he decided to file for unemployment while he was working and making $120,000 a year. And that wasn't all. In all, there were 13 counts of how he essentially defrauded both the House of Representatives, New York State, and a whole bunch of other entities.
Hours after federal prosecutors announced criminal charges, Santos charged with wire fraud, money laundering, theft of public funds, and making false statements. In the 13-count indictment, prosecutors allege he used political contributions to line his pockets, unlawfully applied for pandemic-era unemployment benefits, and lied to the House of Representatives. Santos expected to appear in court later today. Sources tell ABC News he's expected to plead not guilty.
Congressman, did you misuse campaign finances?
Please clear the way, blocking entrance. Please clear the way.
Santos hasn't said how he was able to donate more than $500,000 to his campaign after earning just $55,000 2 years earlier. He's also facing allegations that he illegally used campaign funds to pay for personal expenses like rent. Santos has denied any criminal wrongdoing.
Are you worried about being prosecuted?
I have no clue. I don't know what it's about.
So then, after the first indictment with all of those charges, they continued to look and then dropped another indictment, 23 more counts on George Santos.
New York Republican George Santos was hit with new criminal charges today. The freshman congressman, who's admitted to lying about his background during his campaign, is now accused of charges including conspiracy, aggravated identity theft, and credit card fraud. Prosecutors say Santos stole the identities of campaign donors and then used their credit cards for more than $40,000 in unauthorized charges.
So now, fake resume, committing unemployment insurance fraud, committing identity theft against his own donors. He's Republican donors. So eventually the House of Representatives said, hey, we can't let this guy continue to represent us as Republicans in the House of Representatives. And they expelled him from Congress.
All the TV networks broke into regular programming with the news of Santos's expulsion.
We are coming on the air with live pictures of the floor of the House of Representatives, where members have just voted to expel New York Republican George Santos from Congress.
The vote tally was decisive, with Democrats and Republicans coming together to banish Santos. He sat all alone as his colleagues cast their votes. And when it became clear that his fate was sealed,
just hit 290. George Santos is poised to be expelled from Congress.
Santos came ready for defeat. He even brought his overcoat, draping it over his shoulders as he said his goodbyes, shaking hands with his few remaining supporters before walking out.
So this guy, who is the greatest con man in American history, conned his way all the way to a seat in the House of Representatives, now had to face the music because that criminal stuff wasn't going away. So he had to plead guilty and now was looking at a couple of years in prison.
Thanks for watching CBS News 24/7. I'm Lindsay Reiser. We begin this hour with breaking news. Former New York Congressman George Santos has pleaded guilty to 2 federal felony counts in a Long Island courtroom today. The expelled New York lawmaker appeared in court this afternoon. This is video of him walking into the federal courthouse where no cameras are allowed. He was facing 23 felony counts. He pleaded guilty today to wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. The judge hearing the case estimated that Santos will face somewhere between 6 and 8 years in his sentencing later this year.
Pleading guilty is a step I never imagined I'd take. But it is a necessary one because it is the right thing to do.
Former Congressman George Santos fought back tears moments after he pleaded guilty to faking donations to his own campaign and stealing the identities of loved ones and supporters. In exchange, prosecutors will not charge him with other forms of fraud, like lying to Congress about his wealth, collecting unemployment benefits while actually having a full-time job, and using campaign contributions for lavish personal expenses.
You also trusted me to represent you with honor and to uphold the values that are essential to our democracy. And in that regard, I failed you.
So the first gay Republican ever elected to Congress happened to be a total fraud. I mean, a total fraud. Matter of fact, I'm not even sure if the guy's really gay, but who knows? He's going to prison, and what you're going to say about that. So let me know how you feel about the curious case of George Santos and whether you think, as he was saying before, this was a witch hunt against him because he happened to be a Republican, he happened to be gay, or do you think the lies just caught up with him? Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, do all that great YouTube stuff. My name is Nate the Lawyer, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.